I've just come back from meetings with the American Jewish community at the senior level, traveled to about maybe 40 communities across the United States. And what I encountered in every instance was a feeling that these communities have been abandoned by the state of Israel. Abandoned in terms of information. We left them without, quote unquote, the ammunition they need to defend us, much less themselves.
So, welcome to the Quad, Ambassador Michael Oren. Such a pleasure to have you. And we've been talking on our show a lot about what happened in the last week, the terrible tragedy with the humanitarian aid workers, the pressure from the Americans, the apparent withdrawal from Gaza. And as somebody who's really been in the thick of the action there in Washington, what do you make of this pressure? Is there pressure? Is it blown out of proportion? Or is Israel under an unprecedented, are we in new territory here?
First of all, great to be with you both, with Flora, Vivian. Thank you as always. It's real. I just returned from Washington several days ago. The things that they see from there are not what we see from here. And here it's important to note that the news that Israelis watch every night is very different than the news that Americans watch. Our news is usually about a bereaved family. It's about a soldier we've lost. It's about heroism. It's about restoring one's faith in the country. The news there is 24/7 Palestinian suffering. And the coordinator of policy in the territories we call COGAT in this country will tell you that there's no humanitarian disaster in Gaza. There's no shortage of aid. In Gaza, there's a problem with distribution, but that's necessarily Israel's issue. In Washington, and this is like coming directly from Washington, they believe that Gaza is on the verge of a major famine in the month of May that would be declared by the UN unless steps are not taken immediately, and that Israel will bear responsibility for this. It'll be a man-made human disaster, one of the few of the 21st century. And that was about as unequivocal a rendition as I can give you of what I heard in Washington. Very disturbing, completely different than our reality. And yet, it's difficult not to get deeply, deeply frustrated and disappointed. You know, right now, several hours ago, I read a report in the Israeli press that the State Department is examining various Israeli operations in Gaza to see whether Israel committed war crimes. So we now have our principal ally in the world dedicating time of its State Department, which could be dealing with many, many other crises in the world, looking to see whether the Israeli army committed war crimes. This is the same government that many, many times over in its involvements in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, killed far, far many civilians, by the way, and aid workers proportionally, not just in absolute numbers, but proportionally. And that never investigated itself for war crimes, of course. So there's certainly the question of, that Israel is held into a completely different moral plane than the United States is or any other country. But it makes me want to step back and say the following. My dear friends in America, you have a country here in which 360,000 young Israelis, men and women, reported for reserve duty. That would be 360,000 Israelis, the equivalent per capita of about 20 million Americans. That's more Americans than fought in all World War II. They left their families, they left their jobs to go off and fight for their country, knowing that they may not come home, willing to die for their country. You could probably count in the West on less than one hand the citizens of any country that are willing to go out and die for their country. I don't know many people in Belgium are willing to go out and fight for Belgium. I don't know many people willing to go out in Italy and even in Spain to go out and fight and die for their country today. But in Israel, everybody is. And what are they fighting for? These people, these wonderful young people who left their families, left their jobs, left their lives for 4, 5, 6 months, went out to fight, not just for their families, not just for Israel, for our security. I think they went out to fight for a civilization against a great evil. And to not recognize that has to be one of the great moral and strategic pitfalls of our time. Can I say that more emphatically? Forget the fact that every country in the world that is allied with the United States will now ask, what does it mean to have the United States as an ally? Forget the fact that the Russians and the Chinese are taking very detailed notes. But purely on a moral, historical plan, What does it mean not to stand up for your own civilization? What does it mean to try to demonize, vilify an entire society, probably the last society in the West that still to this degree is willing to stand up and fight for itself and fight for the values that are common to us, that we all in theory cherish? What does that mean? What's the message? And I think that future generations will look back at this moment and shake their heads.
I'm shaking my head, and I'm absolutely quivering inside and outside. Michael, Ambassador Oren, how do you get such how do you get to a point where you have such extreme dissonance, disjunctiveness between the United States and Israel, where there's supposed to be this strong relationship, an alliance? You know, your book was called Ally.
With a certain amount of irony.
Yes, it's fraught and it has its crises. Exactly. But, here we are. There's my hope and understanding is that there's strong defense/security cooperation. There's strong intelligence cooperation. There's strong diplomatic cooperation. What you're telling us is that there's a complete disconnect.
And this administration in particular...
Is that right? And if so, how do we get to that
just
point?
Answer the last point first, and then I'll get to the deeper question of how do we get to the point. That this administration has been trying to do two things at the same time. One time, upholding the U.S.-Israel strategic alliance by providing us with ammunition, with casting vetoes for permanent, unconditional ceasefires in the UN. I mean, the last UN resolution qualified that support to a large extent, but still, and defending Israel's right to defend itself. That administration comes out and reiterates nightly in the face of immense opposition within the party and without, and a political cost. On the other hand, the State Department investigating us for war crimes, the vice president coming out and saying that the administration distinguishes between the people of Israel and the government of Israel, Senator Schumer coming out and calling for elections in Israel, which is completely and utterly inappropriate, unacceptable from a democratic ally. And here I want to say just parenthetically that Israel is one of the few countries in the world never to know a second of non-democratic governance, right? Canada's on that list, Britain, Malta, right, and Gibraltar, but we're the only country on that list that's never known a second of peace, right? And we deserve respect, deep respect. Irrespective of how you feel about Benjamin Netanyahu and this government, we just respect for the democratic process. So you have that too. You have the Deputy National Security Advisor going to Dearborn, Michigan, and telling the community there that apologizing for America's support for Israel, saying that the Biden administration has no faith in the Israeli government. And then you wonder why Hamas is digging its heels in and not giving up hostages. All right, so I'll have that. So you have the administration speaking sometimes literally in two voices. If you listen to the State Department spokesman and you listen to the National Security Council agency folks, they're very, very different messages, same thing. And okay, how do we understand this? I mean, the obvious answer is the presidential elections, which are not national elections. They're elections in 6 states, basically, the swing states. And it's really elections in 2 states. It's in Michigan and Nevada. They call it the two-state solution in the United States. And these states have young populations. They have progressive populations. They have communities of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, a lot of Jews too, but the Jews aren't really giving much pushback. That's a whole different story. And so the administration is going to lose these elections. And here it's important to point out that these elections are fundamentally different than probably just about any other presidential elections in U.S. history, because on both sides, the Democratic and Republican side, they view these elections as existential. If the other side wins, it's the end of America. And I hear this again and again and again in America. So it stakes are very, very high. So high is that people who may even care about Israel say, well, we can support Israel, but if it means we're going to lose the elections, then we've lost the United States. And it's more important for us to preserve the United States, literally, to put it that way. You have that. But beyond that, you have a story that begins decades ago, in the 1960s, the Youth Revolution, which tried to export its ideas outside the campus. It didn't succeed then. So it went back into the campus and it locked the gates behind them and spent generation after generations instilling American students and the people who taught them with these ideas, which are, what they would call anti-racist, anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, and those ideas deeply inform people who have come out of these universities, and it's a characteristic not just of this administration but many administrations. The people who come out of administrations come out of very few universities with the same teachers, and on top of that, the same people are very active in the American media. So these ideas percolate through the American media and percolate through large segments or significant segments, let's just say, of the American voting public. And so the roots of the current situation, on one hand, the immediate roots are the presidential elections and what at stake in those presidential elections. And more deeply is the sea change that has occurred within American culture over the course of the last 5-6 decades. Now, Israel, I can't say, doesn't play a role in this. We can't say that we're completely absolved of responsibility. I think we could have navigated the situation much better. Listen, cards on the table. The first week of the war, I came out with an article in the Israeli press saying that we should flood Gaza with humanitarian aid. Flood it. So, because the most important thing for me was to give time and space for the IDF to operate, and anything that constricted that space I was against. I also was aware of a reality which is very difficult for Israelis to understand, and I admit it, especially in the wake of the war where everyone was reeling in pain. It's this notion that Hamas wants Palestinians to die. Every dead Palestinian is an advantage, is a plus for Hamas, because it increases international pressures on us to agree to a ceasefire. That's all Hamas cares about is a ceasefire. It'll lose 1 million Palestinians. It wouldn't bat an eyelash. And Israelis believe that by denying aid, they can affect pressure on Hamas to give us some information about the hostages, much less release the hostages. It's not true. Hamas doesn't care. And so by denying aid, we're actually helping Hamas. And so I was very much against that situation. We could have flooded the Gaza Strip with aid and medical care. I also think that the President Biden has gone out on a limb for us with all the criticism that he has. He's paid a political price, and that we could have met him at least partially on some of these issues. It doesn't cost us anything, Fleur, Vivian, to speak, to talk. And we could have talked about a pathway to a Palestinian state. What's a pathway? That doesn't mean anything. We could have talked about the morning after to a greater degree. We could have gone, although a little further. For years now, my position on Israel's relations with the United States, and generally diplomatically, and I think you'll both appreciate this, is that we have to determine what are our core issues. On what issues can we not compromise? We have zero margin for error. And then what issues can we show flexibility? Because you just can't be hardcore no on everything, okay? Because that's going to blow back on us. And we've been hardcore no on pretty much everything.
Ambassador Oren, your point segues very well into my next question. And that is about public diplomacy, asbara. And I think we have to look in the mirror, and yourself, you do amazing work. Vivian and I try. And the point is, how much is the fact that we have not been in the arena of asbara, public diplomacy, whatever you want to call it, for the last 20, 30 years, that there's sudden arrogance here that, they hate us anyway, or it doesn't make a difference. And what we're seeing today is that asbara is actually now, the bad asbara that we manage is affecting our ability to actually run and manage a war. So where do you see that element into the big mess that this has become?
Precisely. And you know, as you speak in front of audiences, the most frequently asked question we get invariably is, why is Israel's PR so bad? And this is not from yesterday. This is certainly going back 30, 40 years. Why is Israel's PR so bad? And as you intimated, there are reasons for this. It's a deeply held Zionist belief that it's not important what the non-Jews think, it's important what the Jews do. They're going to hate us anyway. And by the way, there's lots of truth in this. I've come to realize that behind many of the very negative headlines about us, you can see classic anti-Semitic tropes, particularly the blood libel. I mean, when the president of the United States comes out and says Israel cannot kill another 30,000 Palestinians, which is the statistic itself is probably grossly inflated. It doesn't matter. Of the 30,000, half of them are terrorists. All right, does he want us not to kill the terrorists? I mean, what is that? That is a blood libel. And the massacre of the innocents, when Hamas says that 78% of those killed, which is by statistically impossible, are children and women. That's the massacre of the innocents. That's classic anti-Semitic things. I got to give credit to AOC in New York. In Christmas time, her Christmas Instagrams compared Israel's treatment to the Palestinians to the massacre of the innocents in the New Testament. Like, great. It just came out and said it. And so all of that is true. But what we have never internalized is that public diplomacy, hasbara is probably a bad word, right? It means explaining ourselves. But public diplomacy gives time and space to the IDF. And whenever we had a crisis like this in Washington, I would gather my staff together and say, we have one job and one job only, and that's to give time and space for the IDF. But public diplomacy has another, not just a sort of a tactical, even strategic ramifications. It also has a Zionist and Jewish aspect to it. And I've just come back from meetings with the American Jewish community at the senior level, traveled to about maybe 40 communities across the United States. And what I encountered in every instance was a feeling that these communities have been abandoned by the state of Israel. Abandoned in terms of information. We left them without, quote unquote, the ammunition they need to defend us, much less themselves. And I'll
and the strength
give you one
also,
example.
the strength they need to believe in it.
Well, that's that they also have to understand it. So people in Washington say Israel has been bombing indiscriminately. I don't recommend this, but turn on PBS News every night, and that's what you'll hear. But it's a lie. Every bombing operation by the IDF goes through a lengthy approval process that includes experts, military experts, but also lawyers. They make mistakes. The Air Force makes mistakes. You're in a very complex war in a densely populated area where the distinction between terrorists and civilians is also totally immaterial. Mistakes are made. But to say that we bomb indiscriminately is simply untrue. But American Jews don't know this. They don't know the process. 30,000, 32,000 dead. It's repeated over and over and over again. Nobody ever breaks that down for them and say, listen, A, statistically this is impossible. B, it's including the terrorists that Israel killed. C, it's including the Palestinians who were killed by their own rockets falling short. And D, it's including Palestinians who just die. By the way, people do die, all right, of natural causes. But someone died of cancer because of us. And no one breaks this down. So they walk around thinking, I love Israel. I think it's got a right to defend itself. But God, we killed 32,000 Palestinians, right? They don't break it down. And they don't understand that 32,000, even if you accept the Hamas number, if you accept it, is the lowest combatant to non-combatant mortality rate in modern warfare history. It is a fraction of what it was for the United States fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. A fraction. They don't know that. We haven't explained it to them. We've sent them out to battle without bullets.
With no ammunition. Absolutely. Vivian?
Yeah, I'm sort of, this is fascinating. I'm stuck back on your comment about the State Department actually allocating resources to investigating other possible war crimes, which is just, that's over. They've gone way over the precipice on that. It's not really widely known, I don't think, yet. I certainly haven't seen it anywhere before you stated it. Maybe I just missed it. But that's pretty extreme. That's pretty extreme. Is this part of, do you think, this kind of, speaking out of two sides of your mouth that we see with this administration, as you mentioned earlier, between State Department and National Security Council?
Yes. It's also
are they trying to sort of throw Dearborn a bone or Nevada a bone? Or is it real? Because this doesn't get more extreme than an investigation for war crimes,
not much.
Does it?
And it almost makes you see that they're looking for evidence. Okay, what are they looking for? Reminds me of some old Jewish jokes that I can't repeat about old women in butcher shops. And the butcher saying, lady, could you pass that test? I mean, really?
Oy, don't.
And and I think it's also institutional. I think you've worked with the Foreign Office and in Ottawa, and I've worked a lot with the State Department. This is not yesterday.
And the UK is the same.
UK is the same thing, right? Right. Whitehall is the same deal. So it's also institutional. I don't know if they're doing this in the Pentagon. I don't know if they're doing this in the NSA or in the NSC or even in the CIA. I don't know, but they're certainly doing it in the State Department. I can understand that. So it is shocking, but not surprising. Point being.
So in your, given the breadth of your context knowledge and the fact that you've just come back from the States, We had a very dramatic week last week. We had Damascus. We had the World Central Kitchen. We had what was leaked and rumored to be a very stormy discussion between the NSC and RNSA, Tzachi Hanegbi, and Minister Dermer. And apparently it was a very heated exchange on Thursday over 2 hours with respect to what the U.S. said were implausible, totally not feasible plans to secure the civilian population in Rafah so that Israel could go in and do its military operation. It was a very dramatic week. And then Sunday morning, we learn that Israel is engaged in a partial withdrawal from Gaza, but reserving the right, whatever that means, to go back in and do a Rafah operation. What's going on, Michael? There's so many moving parts.
What's going on?
We've seen the Qatar,
there's
everything. Like, come on, just make some sense over the last few days.
That there's some grand bargain out there where, in return for not going into Rafah and the release of hostages, that Israel would get a peace treaty with Saudi Arabia, for example, and lots of rumors flying around like that.
What they call the trifecta. Yes.
I just want to say, parenthetically, that on October 5th, I was in Dallas giving a talk to a bunch of real estate businessmen. And at the end of my talk, I said, I don't know how to, I don't want to scare you, but Israel's soon going to be at war on October 5th. I'm not a prophet, but it seems to me if the United States is trying to broker a peace treaty between Iran and Saudi Arabia, a peace treaty that has a strategic and nuclear component, Iran is not going to sit by quietly and let it happen. They're going to precipitate a war. Why would Iran let it happen now? That's the first question I asked. I also feel that within Israel itself, and this is going to get as a little granular as they say in Washington, a little detailed. Within Israel itself, I don't know if that deal would be very acceptable. I don't know how deeply Israelis really care about peace with Saudi Arabia. I think it's be wonderful what happened, but not destroying Hamas, peace with Saudi Arabia. Ask the average Israeli what they think, especially the Israelis who live down south, and the tens of thousands of Israelis who are still living in hotels.
The price is now higher than ever, I think.
The price for the Saudi piece. What?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, we've certainly
I'm
jacked
saying,
the price
especially
up.
if it's now higher than it would have been a year ago.
Right. And I think the Army is going to have a say in this. And this is what I mean by being granular. In the year before the war, we witnessed, certainly for the first time since the late 1940s, an open politicization of the Army. Since the days when Ben-Gurion had to grapple with one hand with the Palmach and the other hand with the Irgun, okay? The politicization of the Army. And it was politicized in a very specific way. I incurred a lot of wrath by criticizing this and saying someday this is going to come back to bite us. Now we've had an entire generation of Israelis who have fought for months. And I'm an old soldier. I've been in wars. I experienced almost nothing of what these young people experience. 24/7 combat, day after day, week after week, month after month. Okay, nothing in our experience we've had this since the War of Independence. And they are going to come out of Gaza. First of all, they're going to be an extraordinary generation. It's going to be our greatest generation. Just watch. It's part of my great optimism about this country. Patriotic, strong, fragile with a big red line through it. Really. And they're going to come out and say, no, what did we fight for? What did we lose our friends for? What did thousands of our friends sustain horrible wounds for? So we can cut a deal with Saudi Arabia? I think it's going to be very hard to, I think now, as they say, the genie's out of the bottle. And the Army is going to have a say in it. I don't mean, in contrast to what happened before the war, where it was the pilots and the elite unit, this is going to be the folks from Golani, from Kiryat Shmona and from Kiryat Gad. Watch. And they're going to come out and have something to say.
I hope so. Ambassador Oren, as a final thought, now that we know that you're a prophet for predicting
Yes.
that we were going to be at war, how do you predict we're going to get through the next few months? Give us a little bit of hope.
No, I actually very hopeful. Part of that hope starts with standing up to the United States on the issue of Rafah. Here, I'm an historian. If you're going to be a prophet, you got to be a historian too. So the historian tells us that every time America told us not to go to war, and we went to war, America respected us for it. That was true in 48, was true in 56, true in 67, and true in 1981, we blew up the Iraqi nuclear reactor. Every time America told us not to go to war and we succumbed, we got contempt. 1973, in the first Gulf War, standing strong will not only get us respect in the United States, it'll get us more peace treaties with Arab countries. Okay, we have to give war a chance here. They want to make peace with us not because they love us. They want to make peace with us because we're going to defend them.
Absolutely.
It'll send an unequivocal message to Russia, China. We have to win this for our peace. That's what we're fighting for, not just for security. And we have to do that. But we also have to be smart. We can't just be strong. We got to be smart. Be smart. Give President Biden the political tailwind that he maybe needs on the Palestinian issue, on humanitarian aid. Be smart. Create time and space for the IDF. You know, as both of you have been involved in diplomacy, that with every great crisis, there's at least an equal or at least greater opportunity. We have an opportunity with this war to clean out our political house. We have an opportunity to address some of the fundamental challenges facing this country that can prove existential, whether it be the role of the Haredim in our society and bringing them into a society, dealing with the total absence of Israeli sovereignty south of Beersheba, which is a big issue for me. 62% of the country is not under effective Israeli sovereignty. Developing the periphery, addressing tremendous pitfalls in the education and health systems. There's such an opportunity here that we can build. And we have that chance to rebuild. And by the way, we're going to have the generation that can do it. And if you ask me if I'm optimistic about the future of this country, I'm very optimistic about the future of this country. We have been given, with all the agony, we've been given an opportunity.
That's the best way to end. We could listen to you all day, at least another hour. But unfortunately,
I regret that.
Yes. Ambassador Oren, thank you for being that light for so many people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you both. Kol Tuv. Bye-bye.
Thank you.